In this module 9 of Discovering Buddhism, titled Samsara and Nirvana, we're looking at how we are stuck in this cycle of existence called samsara. And then tomorrow we're going to look at how we can break free and achieve the goal of nirvana. And so we've been looking at the Four Noble Truths as a framework for that. And we saw in the first Noble Truth, the truth of dukkha or suffering, describing what condition we find ourselves in. And the second Noble Truth, where we are now, is having a look at why we're stuck in that state. And what we've seen is that we're stuck in this state because of our mental afflictions. In particular, we're stuck through this fundamental ignorance, this ignorance, misunderstanding nature of reality, which leads to the mental afflictions, leads to our behavior, which leads to the result of our experiences, the experiences of dukkha. What I'd like to do now is have a look at how that process works in a bit more detail. So we've got a chart for that. The suffering and its causes chart.
Can you repeat again just the change?
Yeah, well, it's here in the chart. We're going to look at that now. Now remember, here in the Four Noble Truths, if we just go back one page to the Three Vehicles chart, we saw that at the Theravada level of practice, which is what's exemplified by the Four Noble Truths, we said that the Vipassana practice, the insight practice we need to engage in, is this impermanence, dukkha, and no self. So here in the Theravada level, the fundamental ignorance that is the root cause of why we're stuck in this state is this grasping onto self. That we overinflate the sense of me and we're grasping onto this self here, and that this is the root cause. But what we saw here in the Mahayana is the Vipassana practice is this wisdom of emptiness. So in the Theravada system, the root of our suffering is this false sense of me, this overinflated sense of me, grasping onto self. And so actually at this level of practice, how we see the world is no problem. There is a fixed objective world there, no problem. The only problem is how we see ourselves. We overinflate the sense of me, grasp onto self. Whereas in the Mahayana, they say actually there's a deeper level of ignorance than grasping to self. And that is how we see the world is also a problem. That there appears to be this independent objective world out there, and there appears to be an independent subjective me here. But in fact there is no independent objective world, independent subjective me. That nothing exists independently, and this is what this idea of emptiness is. So, therefore, we need to come to realize there is no independent me, no independent world. So that is the fundamental ignorance in the Mahayana, is this grasping onto things existing independently. So I'd like to use this as the ignorance of how we are stuck in this cycle of samsara. So that's what we're looking at here in the suffering and its causes chart. So let's have a look at that and try to make sense of it. At the first step of the process, we have what's called seed of ignorance. So here again, ignorance is this grasping on to independent me, independent world. It's believing everything exists independently. And seed here means habit. We have the habit of grasping onto independent me, independent world. And from a Buddhist perspective, we've had this habit since we were born and well before that. Now, when we look out on the world, everything appears to exist independent of us. And another way of saying that is there appears to be subject-object duality. There appears to be a subject here, object there. But in the Mahayana, it's said that if we investigate, we'll come to realize that these appearances are deceiving us, that things do not exist in the way they appear to us. Even though there appears to be subject-object duality, it's not there. So this appearance that we are receiving is called mistaken dualistic appearance. Now, of course, everything in our life has always appeared to us in this way. And so there's no reason to question appearances, because if we ask anyone else, they'll say, yep, everything appears to exist independent of me too. So there's no reason to question these appearances, so we never do. We just accept, which is step 2. So step 2, ignorance, is simply grasping on to independent me, independent world. And of course here we're not talking intellectual, we're talking instinctively. Instinctively we see independent me, independent world. Now every time we experience something, there's one mental factor that's always present, and that is the mental factor of feeling. And here's another example of how terminology can be confusing. Because normally in the English language, when we hear the word feeling, we think emotion. But here in Buddhism, when you see the word feeling, it doesn't mean emotion. It's coming from the Sanskrit word Vedana. And Vedana is simply our experiencing things as either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Neutral just means neither pleasant nor unpleasant. And this experience of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral can be at the physical level or at the mental level. And at the physical level, when we experience things pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, often the word Vedana is translated as sensation. You know, we have pleasant, unpleasant sensations in the body. But when it's mental, we often talk about pleasant, unpleasant feelings in the mind. But it's the same word, Vedana. So every time we experience anything, we experience things as either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So let's say we're looking at this light here. That light appears to be independent of us. We have the habit of believing that, so we just automatically accept, yes, that light's there, independent of me. And let's say when we experience it, we have a pleasant feeling, pleasant experience. That pleasant experience, together with the belief that that light is existing independent of me, will naturally lead me to assume there must be some attractive quality there that's causing my pleasant feeling. So I'm going to see that as inherently attractive, attractive from its own side. And this view here of emptiness is saying this is a misconception. Or when I look at this light and I have an unpleasant experience, that's naturally going to lead me to assume there must be some unattractive quality there that's causing my unpleasant experience, inherently unattractive, unattractive from its own side, or if I'm having a neutral experience, inherently neutral qualities. Once we get to step 3, step 4 easily follows. So again, let's say we're looking at this light, pleasant experience. We see that it is attractive from its own side. I like pleasant experiences. I want pleasant experiences. That lamp seems to be causing my pleasant experience. I want that lamp. So that's attachment. Or if I'm having an unpleasant experience, I don't like unpleasant experiences, I don't want unpleasant experience, that lamp seems to be causing my unpleasant experience, get it out of here, aversion. Or if I'm having a neutral experience, that's simply going to reinforce my mistaken belief that that lamp is existing independent of me, which of course is ignorance. But often here, instead of the word ignorance, you'll see the word confusion. But this word confusion here is not confused about whether or not this is a lamp. It's confused about how it exists. So here the word confusion is simply another word for ignorance, that we are ignorantly believing that that lamp is existing independent of us. So once we've come to this point here, then these mental afflictions are leading to the other mental afflictions, and this is what's driving our behavior. And of course, the Buddhist assertion is that every action we do based on a mental affliction has a result, has a consequence. And the results of our actions are our various experiences. And our experiences collectively were described, of course, by the Buddha using the word dukkha. So this is describing how we are stuck in this state of dukkha based on this fundamental ignorance. So if we want to overcome the state of dukkha, we need to go back to the underlying cause. We need to eliminate this ignorance. And we eliminate this ignorance, of course, by coming to realize the nature of reality. In this case here, we're talking about realizing nothing exists independently, this realization of emptiness that you'll be covering in some detail in, I think, module 12, the wisdom of emptiness. So what we see here is that this, of course, is the first noble truth, and the second noble truth is the mental afflictions plus the actions. Klesha, karma, leading to first noble truth. So this is describing the process of the first two noble truths, and it's describing the sequence of events of how we are stuck in this cycle of existence called samsara. Any questions about any of those points? A little bit more to add here, we see in the chart. You could ask, what if things don't exist as they appear, why do they appear to exist independent of us if they don't exist like that? Why? The reason is that this ignorance, every time we grasp onto things, of course, one thing that happens is it reinforces our habit of believing that. But this ignorance also has another side effect, which often, the technical word is often called the latency of ignorance, or it's another word for like stain. So this ignorance stains our mind. And what that stain does is it's a little bit like a filter, is that we are looking out on the world through these stains, and that's why things appear to exist independent of us. So that stain causes the object to exist, to appear in a mistaken dualistic way. Which means, if we want to overcome samsara and achieve nirvana, we need to get rid of this, because that's what's causing the dukkha. And this is sort of highlighting the difference between nirvana and enlightenment. Nirvana, to get to nirvana, we need to get rid of this ignorance, and thereby, of course, mental afflictions and suffering. But even if we get rid of this, we haven't got rid of the stains. So even someone who's achieved nirvana by getting rid of ignorance still has these stains in their mind. Which means even someone who's achieved nirvana, of course, is called an arhat. Even an arhat, when they look around the world, to them, even to them, this world appears to exist independent of them. But because they've realized nature of reality, they know that this appearance is mistaken, so they never buy into it. So it never causes a problem. But it's still receiving that mistaken dualistic appearance, and that's what's blocking them from achieving enlightenment. So then we have to get rid of these stains of ignorance. And that's what we need to do to move from nirvana to enlightenment, to get rid of these subtle stains. And we have to do that, again, through the vipassana practice, the emptiness practice. And slowly we can get rid of these stains and thereby get rid of this mistaken dualistic appearance, and then we can achieve enlightenment. So these mental afflictions here are called the afflictive obscurations. They're obscuring us from achieving nirvana, whereas these stains and this mistaken dualistic appearance is called cognitive obscurations. They're obstructing us from achieving enlightenment.
Can you repeat what you just said?
Right. So an arhat does, but they still have these stains in their mind because they're very difficult to get rid of.
So basically the stains, when I, like cognitively, I know that nothing inherently exists, but I still perceive it as
Yeah, it still appears to you, but you know. It's like the analogy is when we're dreaming, in the dream there appears to be a dream me and a dream world, yeah? So when we see something pleasant in the dream, attachment, unpleasant, aversion, fear, and so forth. But if we become lucid in the middle of the dream, still appears to be an independent me and an independent world in the dream, still the same appearance, but now because we're lucid, we know those appearances are deceptive. So then, if we're lucid, it becomes very difficult to have attachment or aversion because we know that things are not existing as they appear, but there's still that appearance there. So similarly for an arhat. So an arhat is like being in a lucid dream. So that it never causes a problem, but they still have that mistaken appearance, like that. Someone who's achieved enlightenment doesn't even have that. I mean, what that really means for us is unimaginable because we've never had that experience. To how to see the world in a way where it doesn't appear to exist independent of us. I mean, to even try and think about that would be very difficult because we've never experienced that. But someone who's enlightened, that's how they experience the world.
Can you give again the definition of obscuring?
Yeah, so it's actually the two obscurations are listed at the bottom of your chart. So here it says the afflictive obscurations is the conception of inherent existence along with seeds. So conception of inherent existence is just another word for ignorance. So the afflictive obscurations is ignorance along with the seeds. So step 1 and 2 here. If we get rid of this, then of course we get rid of mental afflictions and dukkha, and we achieve nirvana. So these are what's called the afflictive obscurations. And here it says the cognitive obscurations are the latencies of ignorance and all factors of mistaken dualistic appearance that arise due to the force of that. So these stains, plus this mistaken appearance, this is the cognitive obscuration. So this is what we need to get rid of to move from nirvana to enlightenment.
So in order to, it's valid to pick the light, the enlightenment.
Oh, okay. Normally I try and find some flowers because...
No flowers today, maybe tomorrow.
So in order to understand that this does not stand apart from me, I need to understand what is emptiness.
Correct. So again, this is what you'll be looking at in Module 12, the wisdom of emptiness. And we'll briefly maybe touch on it tomorrow because it's a big topic. But another way of putting it, particularly with this perspective which we're looking at here, is, you know, if we have a pleasant experience, when we look at that or look at anything, we naturally assume there's some attractive quality there. But again, I think many of us, at least intellectually, can appreciate, and we have a saying in English, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. No? There's no beauty there. This is the view. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But that doesn't mean we're just fabricating it, because that's the other extreme. There's no beauty there, and there's no beauty in the subject. It's the combination. It's our experience that creates the beauty. So there is beauty, but it's not there, it's not here. It's created through the experience. So that's what beauty in the eye of the beholder means. And again, intellectually, maybe many of us accept that. But is that how we behave when we encounter beautiful things? Do we behave as if beauty is in the eye of the beholder, or do we really behave as if the beauty is there? So again, if we can bring that intellectual understanding into experience, and by experiencing emptiness, we will experientially understand beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which means then when we come out of that, if that experience of emptiness is still affecting our mind, and we encounter something pleasant, we will simply enjoy that without craving or attachment.
I don't understand the word combination. The beauty in the eye of the beholder means that the beauty is in my eyes. Now you say
It's in the experience.
Well, what does it mean, the combination?
Because often when we say, because we, see the thing is we think we're in a dualistic world. So if the beauty, it must be either there or here. But the problem...
I thought it's there, I never thought it's here.
Yeah.
So you say it's here.
Well, what I'm saying is that what often we do is that when we negate that the beauty is there, often people think, and we see this a lot in a lot of modern philosophies, who correctly understand the beauty's not there. They just say it's completely fabricated. It's completely subjective. So actually they're still stuck in duality, but now instead of the beauty there, we're sticking it here. So what we're saying is there's no duality. There's no duality.
How do you know it's wrong that the beauty is there?
Sorry?
How do you know that it's wrong that the beauty is there?
Because if the beauty was there, it would mean that everyone who looked there, assuming their eyes are not defective, would have to see it as beauty, because it's there. But not everyone who looks there sees beauty. So that's a proof that it's not there.
How do you prove that the beauty is not in your eyes?
Sorry?
How do you prove that the beauty is not in your eyes?
Because if it was, well, again, when I say that, I mean that it's not, when I say that, because when we say that, we often think we're just completely fabricating, that beauty is a complete fabrication.
Maybe projection. I'm angry, so I see ugliness outside.
Right, but what we're saying is that it's not objective and it's not subjective, it's intersubjective.
But you know, it's not, you also...
Beauty created by intersubject. I don't understand.
Because of our pleasant experience. Beauty, we have a pleasant experience, thereby we label that as beautiful. If we have an unpleasant experience, we label it as ugly. And that's fine, because this labeling, and this is something you probably look at in this module 12, is that we construct a world to make sense or meaning. But this construction is not a complete fabrication. It's a construction that makes sense of the world. So that construction is causally efficacious. It's not just some sort of, I mean, we could construct that there's an elephant in this room, but that would have no meaning. So these are often the two extremes that people bounce between, that there is objective reality or it's completely subjective. But both of those views, and many philosophies are in one of those two camps, are both stuck in dualistic thinking. And so what we're saying is that both of those camps are wrong because there's no duality.
And what is right if these are too wrong?
Is that things are non-dualistic, that there is beauty, but it's neither there nor here. Where is it? See, this is the thing. This is the thing. Is for many philosophies, actually, even in Buddhism, a lot of philosophical systems, even in Buddhism, say for something to exist, it must be findable. We must be able to point to it and say, there it is. This view of emptiness is saying this is the problem. Nothing is findable. Therefore, everything exists. This is something not easy to appreciate. For example, maybe this will help. Is this big?
Big?
Is it big?
Big.
Big, B-I-G, big. So you can't have big on its own.
No.
No? You can't have big and small. No? You can only have them there.
Yeah.
Can you find big anywhere? No, but it exists, yeah? Big exists, small exists. Yeah, exactly. But it's useful, meaningful, and functional. But you can't find big and small, can you? That's the view. So there is beauty, but you can't find it. There is big and small, and these are useful concepts, make understanding. They're not completely fabricated, useless things, but you can't find them.
So beauty is something
Created, that is a concept that makes things, we can function. So we can function.
So it's not a reality, it's in the language.
Well, that is the reality. That is the reality. But again, it's not a reality that is somehow just fabricated, arbitrary. There is reality because big and small function. Everything functions. It's not like some sort of just make-believe. And this is the difficult point. A very difficult point because for us, we demand, if something functions, we must be able to point to it and say, there it is. Because we're stuck in duality. If the world is dualistic, that would be the logical conclusion. That if there is a dualistic world, you must be able to point to it and say, there it is. You must be able to find it. But because this view of emptiness is saying the world is not dualistic, therefore nothing is findable, therefore everything functions. This is difficult. To hold those two ideas together, not easy. But it's from the example of big and small. Big and small are not findable. You can't find big anywhere there. You can't find small anywhere there. But big and small exist and they function.
What happens to Glen when he looks through the window? What does he say to himself?
When you what?
Yeah, but I don't understand the question.
Nothing is not dualistic.
Yeah.
Nothing is there, therefore it exists.
Yeah.
It's not dualistic.
I don't know. There's some trees out there. I don't know.
Don't say to yourself,
Dualistic, nothing is there.
Yeah, I mean, if I have a pleasant experience, I can say this is a beautiful scene. But if I think that the beauty's there, then there's a problem. Because then you have attachment.
No, I'm not saying what was. I said, naturally, when you wake up, you look at the
Therefore,
window.
everything
What do
exists.
you say to yourself?
Same or same? What you want to say?
Lots of things.
I'm saying we are usually speaking to ourselves.
So the problem, so again, the thing is not that we see everything as beautiful or everything as ugly. The thing here is how do we see things? It's not what we see, it's how do we see things. And this view is saying if we see things as existing independent of us, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. If we see things as not existing independently of us, we'll have no mental afflictions or suffering.
So everything is very, very relative.
Like, yeah, that's a way of putting it, yes. In fact, we had in one of the classic Indian texts by Chandrakirti, who talks about this view of emptiness, you know, he says in one part there, he says, we don't argue with the average person in the street. If they say it exists, we accept that. He says, what we may argue with them about is, how does that exist? So again, we're not talking about that somehow there's some alternate reality that we're missing out on. No. What we're talking about is, how does this very world of experience exist? How do I exist? Not whether we exist or not. I mean, you can't even question the fact that you exist if you don't exist. So it's not a matter of what exists, it's a matter of how do things exist, and that's what we're looking at here.
Maybe the answer is the interpretation, because it's like when I see a beautiful tree, it's my interpretation of the tree.
Yes, but
Okay?
but see here we're talking about interpreting how it exists, but we're talking about interpreting the qualities. So that's a different level. That's a different level. You may interpret that as a nice tree, someone interprets it as another way, but that's not really talking about... The fact is if you understand, if you understand it's an interpretation, then you're very close to understanding the view.
Exactly.
That it is a perspective.
It's not the truth, what I'm seeing.
Well, the truth is it's a perspective. That's the truth.
Exactly.
But that perspective doesn't mean that it's not functional. It doesn't mean that we're just fabricating stuff. That's the other extreme.
So if you remember all the time that you are the one who project things on other objects, you understand that you are the one who is responsible for your suffering.
As well, and also, of course, and now we're getting into some deeper water, and often when we start to talk about this, people then say, but when I walk out the room, there's still going to be a laptop here on the table. But then, of course, the interesting question is, who's walking out the room? Because and most people ask these questions with the assumption that there is an independent me here asking this question. So if there is an independent me walking out the room, then yes, there must be a laptop here when I leave. So the question is, how do I exist? And one way of looking at this that's helpful, I think, is in experience, in every single experience, there's singular experience, yeah? And within experience, there's two aspects, experiencer and experienced. And we need to distinguish experiencer from experience, just like we need to distinguish big and small, but there's no big and no small. There's no experiencer independent of experienced. I mean, yeah, I mean, and that's what we believe. We believe there's a me here and a world there. But that belief that there's a me here is like saying this is big. No? Same. Big and small exist, me and world exist, but only relative. There's no me and no world. Different, separate.
So there are millions me only by interacting with each time with the world?
So me, yeah, now we're really getting into it. I don't want to go too far into it because it's a whole huge topic. But I just wanted to give a little taste of it. And so the idea, another way of, the flip side of emptiness is that things are interdependent. And again, most of us at some level think, yes, interdependency. We've heard a lot, you know, that things are interdependent. But often when we don't really think about it, we think, oh, interdependency means there's one thing here, and they're connected. That's not how it is.
Quantum physics talks.
There's only the relationship which creates the endpoints. No, it's the relationship of size which creates big and small. No, there's no big and small that somehow are connected, is it? The same, there's no me and world that are somehow connected. It's the relationship that creates the experiencer and the experienced. Isn't it?
So basically, Glen, if I'm saying this is a beautiful tanka, the beauty resides here, but it cannot reside here if there is no tanka. Is that what you're saying?
Well, beauty is created on the basis of experience.
Yes.
So if there's no experience, then there's no beauty.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
so me and the tanka must coexist.
To have a beauty, yeah, because exactly. You need to have them together for experience to arise, and then that's created.
But they are like of inherent existence.
Yeah, of course.
And I want to know, so afflictive obscurations
Sure.
mean that I grasp the world through the centeredness of me.
So afflictive obscurations, you can either just say ignorance, or sometimes they also put all the other mental afflictions in there. But the root is this. And so what we're saying here is that there appears to be subject-object duality, and we just believe that. We grasp onto it. It's not an intellectual process. It's instinctive. That is the root.
Okay, and then the cognitive.
Is that this ignorance causes these stains in our mind.
Okay, and we deal with the stains.
And these stains are very difficult to get rid of, and that's the last thing we get rid of before we achieve enlightenment.
You said it seems like there is subject and object, but there is none.
No, there's no independent subject and object. Of course there's subject and object.
Okay.
But they are not independent.
No, it's just like there's big and small. I mean, there is big and small, and that's useful and functional, but there's no big and small. You know, they're not two independent things that are somehow connected. They come into existence through the relationship. So in some way you could say everything's perspective in that sense.
So by the moment I go out of the room, as you said before,
But again, there's no world other than your world of experience.
I'm trying to get to your point, is that I stop to exist through that experience and the laptop stops to exist through that experience. That's what you're saying.
See, now we need to be very careful in how we approach this. And the bottom line is, of course, what we're trying to do is understand the nature of reality using the conceptual mind. And it's our conceptual mind that created the problem. So it's like Einstein said, you can't solve a problem at the level you created it. So this view of emptiness, you're never going to figure it out with your intellectual mind. What you can do is think about it with the intellectual mind, but then you need to meditate and you need to come to see how things exist in meditation. And that experience of emptiness is non-dualistic. So if we were to sit down and meditate and have an experience of emptiness, and then we came out of it and someone said, "What did you experience?" You'll go, well, it was sort of like this. You won't be able to explain it because it's a non-dualistic experience. You cannot directly describe a non-dualistic experience with dualistic language. So again, it's good to think about these things, but you're never going to figure it out with the intellectual mind. You have to go beyond that to get the answer, to really get the validation. You need to meditate. There was sorry, you had a question earlier, but...
Yeah, it was actually to his comment. I mean, the way, because everybody's talking about existing and not existing, just to clarify your point, in order to have a beautiful experience with the light, I mean, clearly the light has to exist, sure, and you have to exist, sure, and the experience has to happen. So sure, if you're in a depression and you are suffering, and you see the light, it could actually cause you like suffering. You sure, want to have it off, and you want to have something else. Sure. And if you're feeling great and you're waking up, sure, then the light could be amazing. So it's your experience with the light. If either of you doesn't exist, it doesn't. Correct.
And the reason that we have suffering is we don't realize this. We don't realize that this is what's going on. We think that there's a me here and a world there, and that's why we suffer. So again, we're not talking about whether or not things exist. We're talking about how things exist. You know, that's the big question. We're not saying that there's some alternate reality somewhere else. We're saying that we need to understand this very reality that we experience. We need to understand it correctly. And if we don't, we're going to suffer. That's what this is saying. You know? I mean, really, if we experientially realized, not just intellectually, if we experientially realized that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, we would never suffer.
What about collective seeing or experiencing? Like this is, we all agree that this is a laptop.
Yeah,
right?
because we have similar sense faculties. So for us as humans, we construct the idea laptop because it's useful and meaningful for us. But, you know, a dog wouldn't construct pen because they'd construct some like chewing object. And then a little tiny ant might come along and construct home, somewhere to live, because it's useful for them. So is this a pen, a chewing stick, or a home? From its own side, none of those. From the side of the observer, it's all of those things. You know? So it's not a pen from its own side. Right, just to round off then, because we're running out of time. So what we've done so far today then is, again with Samsara and Nirvana, we've looked at the first two noble truths in terms of the state we find ourselves in, why we're stuck in that state, and we've had a look at these mental afflictions, particularly the attachment and anger. And what we've seen is that, and this is the topic for tomorrow, the second two noble truths, truth of cessation and truth of the path, is that we can liberate ourselves from this, we can achieve a healthy state of nirvana, and we can do that through particularly the wisdom practice, realizing the nature of reality. But what I'd like to do in the first session tomorrow morning, I mentioned that in general, for anything we need a long-term strategy, we need a short-term strategy. So here, the long-term strategy is we need to get rid of ignorance. So long-term strategy is the wisdom practice of emptiness. But also, while we're working on that, it might be good to have some sort of short-term strategy to reduce the negative impact of this process while we're working on that. So in the first session tomorrow morning, I want to look at what can we do at each one of these stages right now in a practical way to at least reduce the impact of this process. So that's what we're going to look at tomorrow morning in the first session. And then we'll have a look at the third and fourth noble truth as well. So that's all for today.